Hi, I'm Marci Kobayashi, and I'm back again with another excerpt from Finding Yoyu. And if you've been following along, then you know that in the excerpt from last week, I was sharing about when Otosan got lost, walking home from the hospital on his own. And that event felt like a huge problem or some kind of big obstacle, but as the saying goes, every obstacle is an opportunity. It really did push us to finally get him some help, so it became an opportunity. Anyway, I'm going to jump right in and tell you about what happened. Here we go. For years, we joked about Otosan's crazy claims of giant fish in the river. We laughed when he insisted the neighbors were standing on the roof of their house when even from a distance it was clear that the neighbor's house had been empty for months. We all thought it was part of growing old, that Otosan's funny stories were par for the course. Thinking back to before we moved my in-laws to Tokyo, I realized that Okasan had been worried that something was wrong with Otosan for a couple of years. Whenever we used to call, she would share concerns about Otosan's odd behavior. We listened and commiserated. Instead of recognizing her comments as red flags, we laughed away Otosan's strange behavior as part of his quirky personality. I should have known better. I've been around elders all my life, and there was a big difference between someone who was slowing down and someone whose mental faculties were changing. I had a close relationship with my maternal grandmother right up until she died. Like Otosan, my grandmother was in her 80s and a witty conversationalist up until the very end. We used to have phone dates, and I would share with Grandma Virginia about what was going on in my part of the world, and she would share about what was happening in hers. We talked about our bodies, the aches, the pains, the changes. We talked about politics, books, the latest singer she was following, and any new TV shows. "You better watch over me when you're no longer here," I used to tease. We would laugh and cry together on the phone. Thanks to our phone dates, I think I was closer to Grandma Virginia than most of her grandchildren who lived in the same country, even in the same state. Grandma Virginia helped me understand that just because your body was failing didn't necessarily mean your mental faculties were going too. Up until her last 2 to 3 days in her body, Grandma Virginia was known for her sharp wit. And that is why I thought I should have known better with Otosan. Though he was strong and healthy, the things he had been saying and believing were becoming progressively more outlandish with every year, and though he could talk your ear off, he wasn't a good conversationalist. Fortunately, the social worker at Okasan's hospital was quick to recognize the signs. She knew about Otosan getting lost on the way home from the hospital. She had also overheard Otosan in storytelling mode. She observed his behavior when we were playing cards. She also noticed how grumpy Otosan got while waiting for me to finish visiting with Okasan. So when I asked the social worker for advice, she wasn't surprised. She recommended we see a specialist and have Otosan formally tested. In late February, only 1 week after Otosan got lost, we got to see the specialist. The day of the evaluation was validating and devastating at the same time. We were there to find out what, if any, kind of dementia he had. I shouldn't say if, because by this point we were sure he was dealing with dementia, but we were anxious to find out what kind. As expected, the doctor ordered several tests, including an MRI. After the scans, we were sent down the hall so that Otosan could be interviewed. The nurse in charge asked one of us to come with him. In a split second, we decided it should be me, since I had spent more time with Otosan over the last few weeks and months than Akira. I would be able to share about his daily life if asked. The nurse seemed a little surprised at first that I was coming instead of Akira. Otosan didn't seem to question it at all. Throughout the evaluation, Otosan tried very hard, and it broke my heart a little. He did so well on so many of the questions, but there were other sections that he couldn't do at all. I could tell that he felt a little ashamed, and it left an imprint on him, especially when he couldn't answer what day it was. For months, after the evaluation, he made it a point to check the date and day and was quick to correct us if we were wrong. It was annoying, but for as long as he could do it, and for as long as he cared about doing it, I wanted to encourage him. I felt sorry the day of the evaluation because he might have answered the correct date if he had been paying attention. Otosan had been on a sort of forced vacation since moving to Tokyo, and it wasn't necessary to keep track of the date, so he hadn't. If Otosan had been able to say the correct date or even day, it wouldn't have made a big difference to his overall evaluation. Still, every bit of pride counts. During the evaluation, the nurse also asked if Otosan knew what city he was in and asked for his address. He knew he was in Tokyo, but didn't know what city. I thought maybe he struggled to answer because the move was still relatively new, except that when the nurse asked for his address in Hiroshima, he had trouble with that too. After the nurse finished asking Otosan questions, she asked me questions, with Otosan sitting right there. I had to tell the nurse that, yes, he sometimes reported seeing things that the rest of us could not see, that his stories of large fish in the river were more than the bragging of a proud fisherman and erred more on the side of hallucination. I cringed and sighed when I saw how red his face got. I felt like I was betraying him. Though Otosan regularly said strange things and sometimes saw things that we did not, he still had moments of clarity when he knew who he was. I couldn't imagine how disturbing it must have felt to hear someone talk about you as if you were crazy when you knew you weren't. I was so embarrassed that I couldn't even look at him. I knew I had to answer the nurse, though, and minimizing his condition would not help any of us. I wondered how differently Akira or his brother would have answered the nurse's questions. I tried to be brave and say what I knew with as much detachment as possible. It was so much easier to talk about his condition when he was not there. Until that day, Otosan had no idea that any of us seriously thought there was anything wrong with him. After meeting with the nurse, we waited for another 30 minutes to see the doctor again. Based on the MRI and Otosan's performance during the evaluation, the degree of deterioration was indicative of dementia and likely Alzheimer's. Otosan was given a prescription that would hopefully slow the progression. After the long morning, we were starving. We skipped the pharmacy and went out for lunch instead. One more day without the medication wouldn't make a difference anyway. At the restaurant, Akira and I were quiet. We didn't know what to say to Otosan, who was happily eating a steak. He didn't seem to understand what the doctor had told him. I knew there were some things we could do with his diet and daily life that might help him improve his condition or stall the progression, but would he willingly cooperate? Some people with Alzheimer's and other forms of dementia were aware that they had a problem. To the extent that they were still aware, they talked openly about the advancement of their condition. I had read books about families that worked together and had even seen shows on TV where people with Alzheimer's gathered in a support group to help each other. Because we had all thought for so long that Otosan's strange behavior was due to aging and couldn't be helped, it never occurred to us to sit down and talk to him about it. I regretted this. I regretted that we had not investigated sooner. I know that he might have dismissed the diagnosis and or denied it even if he had been told sooner. However, at the very least, had he been told sooner, it would have given him a choice. It would have allowed him to educate himself and do something about it if he had wanted. In a lot of ways, it felt like it was now too late. By the time February came to a close, the initial chaos of moving Okasan and Otosan to Tokyo had settled. I was anxious to get as much as possible done in March because I knew Akira wouldn't be much help once the new school year started. Almost all schools in Japan hold graduation in March and the new school year begins in April. The same goes for graduating college students who generally start their new jobs in April. April always had that same back-to-school fervor that August and September brought to people in the States. Once April came, I knew Akira would be extra busy with new classes, new students, new committees, and meetings. Whatever else needed to get done had to happen in March. Thankfully, we had already created a good rhythm for most everything about our new living circumstances. Of course, we would eventually have to find a long-term care facility for Okasan, and with the end of Otosan's pachinko binge, we also had to figure out something more for him to do during the day besides watching TV. All of that aside, Otosan and Okasan's transition to Tokyo could be called complete, except for one thing: Fuku-chan. That's all for today. I will leave Fuku-chan and her story for next time. And I have to add here that it's funny because at the time when I heard that Otosan had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's, I sort of felt like, okay, yeah, we have the answer now. Now we know what's wrong. We can get on with things. And I really did feel like things were settled. I wasn't prepared for everything that was coming after that. So, and I shouldn't be laughing. I'm sorry. I don't mean to be disrespectful to anyone. It's just that I really didn't know what I was getting into. So next week, I'll be back with the story of Fuku-chan and a trip that Akira and his father take back to Hiroshima during March. So have a great week, everyone, and I'll be back again next time. Thanks for tuning in. Bye for now.